Hello folks, I'm Jonathan Milam here reading my first novel, Lightpath. I'm going to continue, this is part 2. I'm going to continue with the end of chapter 1 and we will probably get through chapter 2. My son Marcus was waiting for me by the time I reached home. No small feat, for it was only a walk of a few minutes. I have to disagree with Kinsey. I know I'm cuter than you, I said with a laugh. He blushed noticeably and replied, I have no idea what you're talking about. Liar, liar, pants are on fire. I shouted at him and pretended to shove him away, but then drew him in close for a loving hug. Surprisingly, he'd never rejected hugs from his mother or I, contrary to what I'd expected as he'd gotten into junior high and high school. Dad, seriously, he said soberly, is Kinsey going to be all right? I really like her, and I was waiting for her report from the cancer clinic today to talk to you about seeing her. Marcus, when I used to be so busy with Christian ministry and was consistently holding healing campaigns in churches, I felt strongly that cancer wasn't just an illness. It was also a spirit. It can be banished, but it can also hover around for years and attempt to come back at the most unexpected times. However, I think in Kinsey's case, cancer was beaten decisively. Ah, Dad, that's great news. Kinsey is a super person. Marcus, she must be one of the most popular girls in high school. How do you rate such a close relationship with her? My son knew I loved and thought the best of him, but I was pretty sure he wasn't on the dating radar of the hottest cheerleaders in his school. In Texas, that was territory generally reserved for the starting quarterback, and my son preferred soccer. He paused for a moment and then thoughtfully said, Dad, she's not so popular anymore, at least not with the hot crowd. Why not? I asked. She's a doll, or will be when she gets her health back under control. Well, she was popular, maybe the prettiest girl in school running with the most in crowd. But she's different than most kids. She's solid emotionally. The story I heard was that she didn't want to party as hard as some of that crowd, and so they cut her off. I thought that very unusual for a high school student. Peer pressure usually ruled in the teen world. He went on, they started calling her lightweight earlier this year, and I asked her about it. She told me that she had been at a party where lots of drinking was going on. She felt it was going to go downhill fast, and so she wouldn't drink any liquor or even beer. One of the guys hid his dad's stash and brought her a non-alcoholic beer as a joke. But then she just popped the tab, said it was exactly what she wanted, thanked him, and then told them she wasn't getting drunk, she wasn't doing pot or any other drugs, and from then on, they called her lightweight and had less and less to do with her. Good for her, I said. After a moment of thoughtful silence, I went on, Marcus, I think she has spiritual gifts. He stopped and looked straight at me. How can she? She isn't really spiritual. He then sought to alter his comment. I mean, she's a super girl, a really good girl, and a great person, but she doesn't know much about God at all. Her family's never been involved in church. Well, we've always associated healing power as a church thing, but just before I began with her today, I felt that odd burning at the back of my head, right? Yeah, you've told me about that before, he responded, obviously wondering what this symptom of power had to do with Kinsey. Here's the thing that really surprised me. I noticed Kinsey at one time today. She had a curious expression on her face and was also rubbing the same spot on her head that was burning on mine. Oh man, I should have known. She's told me for months that she could tell bad people from good people. When she first told me, I laughed at her and said, yeah, so can I. The people that don't like me are bad. I remember she punched me in the arm and said something like, no, you idiot. It's hard to explain, but I can see another facet of them. The inner portion of them, if they're bad, is like a very sick person, wasted and twisted. Does this make sense to you, Dad? Have you heard of anything like this? So she's telling me this in the lunchroom, and I laughed so hard I nearly lost it. She got embarrassed at me laughing, and then she started laughing too. We were both embarrassed by laughing at a private thing like this in a public lunchroom. It was tacky of us, I have to say, but that's Kinsey and me. We really have a blast when we're together. He paused a moment and then went on. Then the next week, she took a test for the headaches she'd been having, and she told me she thought she may have a tumor. But Dad, what was she seeing? And suddenly, just as I was ready to answer Marcus about what Kinsey was seeing, I saw something, a distinct view into the future. Some would say I was seeing a vision. At any rate, I was still standing on our long, winding driveway, but my mind was transported into what I knew was a time yet to come. Marcus and Kinsey were getting married. Kinsey had on a stunning wedding dress, complete with a very long train and veil, and Marcus had on an all-white tuxedo with a scarlet bow tie. I saw her parents and grandparents, my wife and daughters, all were present, but I noticed with a shock that I didn't appear to be seated with them. And then, just as suddenly as I glimpsed the future, I found myself standing back on my driveway with a far-off look in my eye. "Dad, are you all right?" Marcus asked anxiously as he stood nearby. I blinked a few times and then smiled ruefully at him. "You just saw something, didn't you?" he asked. "Yes, I think so. Nothing to discuss now, though. But back to Kinsey. She must indeed have spiritual gifts. She is seeing beyond the physical realm. She's seeing the spirit of the person as it is, I think. Some people have let things like bad habits, hatred, jealousy, or whatever, they've let it distort, twist, and cripple their spirit, their inner being. She must be able to see this. There's a phrase somewhere in the Bible that describes what she's seeing, something like a plague of the heart, but I can't recall exactly how it goes. She must have a supernatural ability to see the spirit within a person, the part of them that forms what they really are. Her gifts are surprisingly strong, I guess, and they'll probably develop quickly now as her body regains its strength. You can help her in this area, right? You know how these things work." "Yes," he said with a big grin. "You've shared your knowledge of how these things work with all of us kids, Dad. Besides, as I said earlier, I think Kinsey and I are going to be tight for a long time." Yeah. I can only hope. Now, let's get some food," I replied with a smile as I opened the door to our home and followed him in. "Dad, we're on our own tonight. Mom's been gone again for hours, and Jennifer is working. What do you say to the potential of pizza? I can have one out of the oven in short order." As I reflected on my wife's absence, again, as my son had emphatically stated, I felt a vague premonition of doom. Fortunately, the pizza that my son prepared was excellent. Chapter 2, The Joy of Marriage. Later that evening, I sat with the trumpet in my hands. It was one of my favorite horns, and old, vintage, of course, is the preferred term. COM 12B from 1939. The body was an attractive yellow brass, a rich gold color, patterned exactly like Kahn's venerable 22B as far as I could tell, but what made the 12B special was its copper. It could put out the warmest tone imaginable, and it didn't need a highly modified mouthpiece to achieve it either. It could also bark when needed, and try as I might, I couldn't overblow the bell. It was an outstanding horn and one of my favorites. I had a very nice Kahn New York Symphony Special from '37 and a lovely King Silver Tone from 1950, but I was particularly fond of the 12B. The fact that I'd found it in a pawn shop for $150 just made me appreciate it that much more. She was a bargain and a great player. I could listen to trumpet players like Arturo Sandoval, Chris Bodie, Fabrizio Basso, or Phil Driscoll for hours. Between listening to them and reading at trumpetherald.com, one of the top trumpet forums online, I certainly didn't lack for motivation to play. I was using an old jet tone Symphony Model C mouthpiece and having a nice time. Tonight was one of those nights, though. I couldn't play much above high C. Still, I had fun doodling around. I felt like we all fit together, the trumpet, the mouthpiece, and me. I played well into the night, working assiduously to avoid my wife. She was usually asleep by 11, so I stayed upstairs until 11:30. I'd play the trumpet for a while, alternating scales, intervals, tonguing practice, and playing my favorite songs. When my lip was feeling worn out, I'd try to focus and reach for a glimpse of the future, another vision. I could see into the future for some things, but when I sought to perceive exactly what the future held for me, I saw only darkness. Concerned but not frightened, I decided to call it a night. I entered the bedroom quietly, walking into our large bathroom, closed the door, brushed my teeth and washed my face, then turned off the light. I was able to accomplish all this and make it to my bed in nearly complete silence. My wife's deep, sleepy breathing never altered. She never said a word nor reached for me through the night. That's what passed for success in my marriage these days. Early the next morning, I was back in what I considered my office. It was a spare bedroom, available since Angelica, my oldest, had moved into her own apartment a few miles away. I played my Yamaha keyboard for a while, practicing a few songs that I could play and sing in church if one of my dwindling opportunities miraculously arose. After practicing my keyboard, singing, and trumpet, I tried to call a few acquaintances of mine that were pastors. I was hoping to schedule opportunities as a guest minister in their churches. The fact that I played trumpet, keyboard, and sang, while speaking was my dominant draw, had always been a help, but as I aged into my 40s, my speaking opportunities at churches were becoming few and far between. I found it strange, but as I had matured, I had been part of a growing number of healings and miracles. Yet the more healing and miracles I encountered in churches, the less wanted I had become. How ironic, right? Honestly, I felt I could defeat most illnesses now. It was the pastors that I couldn't get past. For some inexplicable reason, they did not want me in their churches. It was rare now for pastors to answer their phone when I called, and rarer still for them to return my messages. In fact, I had nothing on my schedule in the future at all. My calendar didn't have a mark in it, and my last chance to preach had been several weeks back. That meant, well, I was looking at no income and no hope for things to improve. Huge bummer. I suppose my bleak speaking prospects and the black expanse when I tried looking into my future were a match. Not a real positive match either. I closely examined a letter that I'd received a few days ago and really dreaded to open, but I finally opened and read it. The single-page letter first angered me, then merely left me feeling sickened. I was suggested, ordered, to cease and desist from contacting pastors, churches, and or any satellite groups, and further ordered, suggested, to tender without further use my credentials of ordination and religious licensure. I was officially defrocked from the religious organization that I'd been a part of for all of my adult life. No wonder my future appeared dark. I had no future, at least with organized religion. No wonder my friends weren't answering my phone calls or returning my messages. I had been blackballed. Fortunately, I had one close friend left. While I dreaded my upcoming visit with him, I couldn't put it off any longer. My options were quickly becoming very limited indeed. When I arrived at Art's home, I was surprised his wife didn't greet me with her mischievous smile and happy laughter. I had to ask, "Hey, where's the lovely wife? Did you finally run her off?" "Why would she want to leave perfection?" my friend affably asked with his usual quick wit. This was the first and last light point of the evening. Just a few minutes later, I lamented my situation. "Art, I'm only 47 years old, and I'm contemplating medical suicide. I'm not even 50, and I'm thinking of selling my heart for big bucks. How did I get here? Art, tall and trim, blonde and handsome, sat casually behind his desk, rocking back and forth in his office chair. His relaxed posture offered no hint to the gravitas of our situation. We've reached this point because you're dissatisfied with your earning potential, really your entire work potential, and because of this, your life seems totally sour. Your marriage is challenged, shall we say, and your children are growing older and have dreams and hopes that you can transform into reality by making the most of your present opportunities. Well, that pretty neatly summed it up. Finally, I responded to Art. Can you run this whole thing by me again? All right, he began slowly. When we first began considering this months ago, I made some inquiries. I eventually came in contact with a man that is very, very wealthy, but he needs a new heart. All the money he has won't lengthen his life, but he's willing to fork out millions to the right person for the right heart. He doesn't want to wait on a common list for a common heart from a common donor, but he is willing to pay big bucks to be sure that the heart he gets is from the quality of person he wants, that it will significantly improve his current health and offer him the hope of many more years of life. Simple, right? Yeah, very simple. Quite logical from his perspective, I suppose. I muttered my agreement. Art went on. You recently had a thorough medical examination. Your heart is incredibly strong, and you're in exceptional physical condition, which is just what this guy wants. At this point, Art paused for a moment, searching for the right words. I'm not trying to talk you into an early death, but you've complained of your life for years, and you've been despondent or depressed more times than I can count. You're mid-40s, you've got a hot wife, and great kids. You just can't earn a dime. I'm your friend, and believe me, your chance to earn millions here is an unbelievable opportunity. It's a great option for you. You can go out on your own terms, choose your own time, and leave millions of dollars, literally millions of dollars, to your wife and children for their future needs. Your children can become anything they want. You'll essentially have opened the oyster of life for them. He was right. I had tried all my adult life to provide well for my family, but my results, like my checking account, were lacking. Like Nebuchadnezzar, I felt as though I'd been weighed in the balances and found wanting, distinctly wanting. My marriage, like my income, was a disaster. Things between my wife and I had been getting worse for years, but now we're at a particularly painful point. My children were old enough to realize how inept I was at providing for them, and it seemed to me that their respect was, well, waning. Not that I blamed them. They were completing high school and into their college years, and there was no denying that my input on their careers was met with polite, although respectful, reservation. Rightly so, I suppose, but still a sad realization. My kids loved me, and I loved them, but, well, it was like my marriage, painful. Okay, I finally asked, what's our next step? Art took my question to be an affirmation of his plan, me selling my heart for the good of my family. He rose from his chair, reached out, and offered a solemn handshake, then pulled me in for a man hug, complete with the obligatory back patting. Our next step? Well, let me make some calls, and I'll let you know. I couldn't see the cold smile that crossed his face as he held me tightly. Strangely, the subject of our discussion didn't depress me. Really, life had been disappointing for me for so many years that finally getting a large sum of money was, well, sweeter than the death that would accompany it. Still, as I left Art's home and headed back to my place, I began a mental review of our conversation. Years ago, I'd adopted the mindset that serious discussions should always be reviewed afterwards. Details, general feelings, additional thoughts, I tried to include them all in my review. While Art and I were friends, our discussion was of paramount importance, and it was big business. The business of life. My life. My review led me to focus primarily on my feelings, and for some reason, they weren't positive. I felt good about the financial opportunity of selling my heart. I hadn't had good things happen in my life financially for years. I'd peaked in my early 20s with some initial success in Christian evangelism, the niche in Christian ministry that I delighted in, but I now seemed to be living in a perpetual downhill slide. Honestly, nothing I had going, or was likely to get going, could compete with the value that I could get by selling my heart. This was obvious. Apparently, many people don't mind, and some even look forward to, retirement as they slowly degrade physically and mentally for the last 40 years of their life. This was something I preferred not to experience. The sale of my heart was what Art had referred to as my best positive option. The phrase was pure genius. Getting big bucks for my heart while it was young enough to prove value, but old enough to prove quality was appealing if one was looking for a positive option amidst an otherwise unenjoyable life. Still, something was nagging at me. A warning vibe was buzzing around my subconscious. I couldn't put my finger on exactly why I was uncomfortable, but I did have a rather disconcerting feeling that annoyed me. Leaving Art's home, and I only looked back, I would have seen Art closely eyeing my departure. The fiercely superior expression on his face would have surprised me. And had I watched longer, I would have seen him cautiously close the curtains on all his forward-facing windows and retreat to an inner room. He paced nervously for several moments before dialing a number. Clearing his throat anxiously before his call was answered, he was scarcely recognizable as the calm, relaxed individual I had spoken with short moments before. His cool facade was now betrayed by growing sweat stains coloring his shirt. Art listened to the phone ring numerous times and would have ended the call, but as instructed, he waited. Finally, the call was answered. Yes. It's Art, sir. And I have very good news to report about your potential heart replacement. David Lillard is at an all-time low, and I'm quite certain he's ready to end his life. I believe we have him just where we want him. Our primary goal for the last few years is finally going to become reality. Just a few minutes later, Art concluded the conversation by saying, "Really, sir, why don't I join you for supper tomorrow in New York, and we can discuss just how well we are doing?" A thoroughly exuberant Art was wildly punching his fist in the air as he calmly intoned, "Why, thank you, Demetrius. Most kind of you. I'll see you tomorrow." He then triumphantly concluded his phone conversation with an impromptu victory dance. Yes, he'd lose an old friend, but he'd gain his friend's wife and a vast sum of money along with her. Meanwhile, after the brief walk from Art's home to mine, I found Janine, once the love of my life, but now the bane of my existence. She was either dead or, more likely, was feigning sleep. With my luck, she was just faking sleep. But a guy can dream, right? I dozed off soon after lying down, but found my rest to be tumultuous. At some point, the supernatural replaced my natural dream state. Mystical dreams and visions aren't a shock to me, but they aren't every night occurrences either. Well, I'd been probing my future, and here it was, at least partially. Always interesting, always different, often something other than what we might expect. Welcome to the supernatural. Tonight, at least, offering a fascinating dream, which, in reality, was a view of my future. This is the best way I can tell it. I can see this guy coming into focus. Well, what do you know? It's me. I'm in front of a crowd of folks that are seated. They dress nicely but casually, and they seem engrossed in what I'm saying to them. At first, I see myself in front of this group, then I see a man approaching me. He stands in front of me, he's leaning forward, and we're conversing casually, kind of like a brief private conversation as everyone else looks on. Then I slowly reach up, close my eyes, and lay my hands gently on either side of his head and seem to be speaking. He leans backwards suddenly and shuffles quickly to regain his balance. I move with him and again place my hands softly upon his head. Now I see him stagger again, and he's beginning to weep. I converse with him for a moment more, then speak to the crowd that is watching with rapt attention. After I speak for a moment, 2 or 3 others rise, stand in the center aisle, and wait for me to address them as I have the man that just stood before them. The feeling I am left with as the dream fades is positive. Throughout the night, bits and pieces from the same setting find recurrence in my mind. As is often the case when I dream like this, I can't say that I slept well that night, but I awoke feeling quite refreshed and hopeful. My palms feel funny, almost as though they're itchy, as they did with Kinsey. And I find myself chuckling when I recognize the itchy palm thing as a harbinger of supernatural healing. Power will soon be flowing from my hands to those in need, those whom I have just seen in the dream. Amazing, isn't it? I'm contemplating cutting my life short, and I'm feeling real, genuine, strong motivation and hope for the first time in a long time, a very long time. I don't feel that my selling my heart for money is problematic. I feel like I'm gaining positive options in life because of my plan to sell my heart. Who knew? The next evening, Janine arrived late for supper. A bit unusual, but more common the last few months. She had been out with someone, which again was a bit strange. This piqued my interest, as it had 2 nights previously with Marcus. Again, I sensed darkness when I looked at her. Around the supper table, featuring a lovely meal that Ange, short for Angelica, and I cooked, well, I'd rinsed the shrimp, turned down a burner when she asked, and washed pans on demand. I closely observed each family member. As our family had matured, it was becoming increasingly uncommon for us all to eat together. But when it occurred, it was always a thrill. Ange joined us at home for a family meal. We sat together, chatted, and ate. Angelica, our oldest at 27, had my blue eyes and Janine's perfect facial structure. Jennifer, our middle child at 23, had blonde hair, like her older sister Ange, and my light complexion with her mother's dark eyes. From somewhere in our murky Irish, Scottish, English ancestry, she'd received far better height than most of our family's ladies, and had several inches on her older sister. Marcus, or Boy Wonder, as I often called him, was 18 and all boy, with a positive, contagious optimism that made his friends love him and covet his presence. Like Janine, they were all good-looking, with pleasant personalities that saw them with as many friends as they cared to fit into their schedule. Yes, they definitely got their good looks from Janine. I'd maintained my good looks and wasn't giving them to anyone. Unable to keep good news quiet for long, during one quiet moment I burst out with, "Here's a thought. I'm not sure it'll happen, but if I came into a sizable sum of unexpected money, how would you all like to go for a family trip somewhere really nice?" Marcus, making the most of the whole family being together, wanted to have some fun. "You mean a nice trip? Like at the KOA tent campground on the other side of Houston? To which I should have responded, no one likes a smart aleck, Junior. But I enjoyed his humor too much to be condescending. Instead, I said, very funny, boy wonder. I think you all tried that a few years ago, right? And they had. The temperatures reached over 100 degrees, the sun was scorching, and it was so hot, even the muggy, humid Houston nights never cooled down. The trip was cut short, and a quick return home was appreciated by all. Fortunately, I'd been out of town for that particular respite. I'll pass if that's the plan, Angelica calmly replied. As our oldest child, she could display an icy calm when needed, and often used it to illustrate her advanced maturity, even when it wasn't necessary. But if you mention Naples, as in Italy, I may be able to find the time. She smiled at me with a challenge, her eyes sparkling much like her mother's had many years ago. Jennifer, our peace-loving middle child, said, if we can make the dates work, I'm willing to go anywhere the family wants to go. Why didn't we have more children like her? Can duplicates of this child be ordered? I wondered. I pressed my point. I think someplace really nice would be the only thing appropriate for you all. Maybe Europe or Hawaii. I was getting excited with my own idea, even if it would be my swan song, my last vacation with the family as a whole. Janine, loving wife and mother that she was, chose to show just how thoroughly she could torpedo a delightful family moment. Why don't we face reality? With my loving husband, that would be your father's, diminishing income, camping on the other side of Houston, maybe beyond our reach. We have car insurance to pay, our ever-growing cell phone payment is now due, and honestly, maybe the man of the house could pitch in for some of these essentials instead of some pie-in-the-sky vacation hoax. Maybe we should think about bill payment before we consider vacation waste. Her comments not only embarrassed and humiliated me, but abruptly ended the current of excitement and fun the rest of us had enjoyed but moments before. If Janine noticed the black cloud she'd created, she didn't seem to care. As the kids sat in shocked silence, my dear wife rose and called out, "Someone else can clear the table and wash the dishes. I prepared meals without help from anyone for years, and I won't perform any cleaning tonight. Just do it. About time someone else works in this house beside me." And with this, she departed the room. I imagined cleaving her back with the large knife on the table. One good throw. Meanwhile, Marcus looked down at the table. Angelica stared furiously at her departing mother, and Jennifer appeared ready to cry, one tear slowly trickling down her cheek as she tried to hide it with her hand. She spoke softly behind her hand, "Dad, I'll be happy to go anywhere you like, especially if Mom can't come." Angelica then chimed in, her voice shaky with emotion. "Yes, anywhere the wicked witch of the South doesn't fly." Marcus, no doubt the closest to his mother, mumbled sadly, "It probably won't happen anyway." I laughed heartily, although I felt like slinking, thoroughly humiliated, out of the house. "It just may be a high point for our family's memory, kids. Give me a little bit of time to work on the plans, the money, and your dear mother's attitude. She's stressed with bills at the moment, but things are looking up financially for me, and for all of us, really. And I'll take care of cleaning the table and washing up the big items. Pots and pans, you know, are a man's job." I laughed loudly, grabbed a nearby dishcloth, swung it around my head wildly a few times, and then tried snapping and popping the kids with it as they scurried away. It was an act of levity on my part, but as the kids played along, we all felt a little better. Thank God, I thought. Laughter restored. My father had loved to laugh, and that's something I inherited from him. I love to laugh and see others laughing. The one thing my children would remember when thinking of me, I hoped, would be the laughter that was so often a part of my presence. Dishes done, I faced the worst part of my day, meeting my wife in our bedroom at the day's end. When I thought about it ahead of time, I could almost become sick at my stomach. Best not to think ahead and just enter and prepare for rest, hoping desperately that bitter words wouldn't contribute to growing underlying tension and yield yet another sleepless night. What can I say about my wife, Janine? When I first met her, I was immediately struck by her natural beauty, poise, and confidence. As the years have passed, I've become more aware of her beauty, which seems enhanced by time. Like fine art or diamonds, time seems to be Janine's friend. At the moment, however, unlike time, I was not Janine's friend. Sadly, I was her husband. Oh, the joy of marriage, I thought, as I prepared to enter our bedroom, which I privately referred to as the battleground. Entering, I saw Janine sitting in bed pecking on her computer with the TV broadcasting yet another lame, distracting show. "So, how was your day, lovey?" I tried for a jaunty, hearty tone as I leaned over to give her a kiss. As usual, she refused to yield her lips to me. At the last moment, she bowed her head, forcing me to kiss the top of her head. If I ever wanted to kiss her lips, I literally had to take her chin in my hand and lift her face up to mine. Her response was the usual. My day was the same as always. After 30 years with the same company, it's all the same. Why is it you seem to never tire of asking that same old question? Her response was icy, no emotion, and no eye contact. She rarely looked at me and rarely spoke to me. I think one could call this a deteriorating relationship. Really, put a fork in it. It was done. My response to her showed little of my sorrowful thoughts, though. "Well, you deserve a vacation, and I think I can make a really fine one happen for all of us." She finally looked at me, the better to show her hostility, I suppose. I could hardly believe the rage that her expression held. "How are you going to make a European vacation happen? Are you going to magically just find the money in our checking account? Actually, it's my checking account, since I put almost all of the money into it. And when you offer some super expensive vacation to the kids, who pays for it? Do you think you do?" Her voice was rising with anger, and the occasional projectile of spittle was shooting out. She was so furious. I wasn't shocked, but I was surprised. I was accustomed to her being aloof, but she rarely attacked like this. "I'm sick of living with a lazy loser like you. You haven't gotten any realistic chance of providing a decent weekend for our family, and you come out of the blue talking about Europe. You disgust me. You sicken me. I'm embarrassed I provided for you and put up with your lame attempts at Christian ministry for so many years." She was hissing now, so as not to alarm the children. Tears were running down her face, and thank God, I think she was running out of breath. Either that, or maybe she was in the early stages of a heart attack. Not that I'd wish death on anyone, but never look a gift horse in the mouth, right? Thoroughly surprised at her unusually venomous display, I calmly looked at her, leaned in towards her, and in the softest, breathiest voice I could find, I whispered, "Does this mean we won't be sharing intimacy tonight?" "Get out! Get out! Get out of my room! Get out of my house! Just get out!" I wasn't sure, and I knew I could be wrong. But wasn't she kind of hinting about me absenting myself from her presence? Seriously. It's awful to be thoroughly insulted by your spouse, degraded by your lover, humiliated verbally by one's once loving wife, and have nothing to do but acknowledge the accuracy of the entire diatribe. Changing quickly into shorts and a t-shirt, my usual sleep ensemble, I paused at the door to our bedroom, looked back at Janine, and softly said, "I'm sorry I've been such a huge disappointment to you for so many years. I promise something will change to make your life better soon." I meant it. And her suddenly shocked expression seemed to indicate she understood the depth of my sincerity. I found a blanket and laid down on the living room couch to sleep. Just before I dozed off, I texted Art, "Make it happen. I want this thing done." I couldn't stand many more lights like this. My heart, as healthy as the doctor said it was, couldn't stand emotional wear and tear like this forever. Better to sell my heart than to have my wife destroy it. Strangely, though, I didn't blame her for her anger. Well, not much, anyway. When I met her, she was happy enough, but 20 years with me had erased the happiness and replaced it with anger. Anger and a vast, growing, hate-filled bitterness. I believe you may get as much as $5 or $10 million, but who knows? Maybe you'll get even more, Art said softly. It was a phone call. Art was out of town on a business trip, and I'm working for you, bro. I'm trying to get these people to really open up and pay you well. Did you ever conceive making this much in your entire lifetime? No, but that's really the problem, isn't it? It's not just making $5 or $10 million in my life. It's $5 or $10 million for my life. I wasn't sure how he felt, but as for me, the dollar amount was a staggering sum, and my life didn't seem worth much in comparison. I could imagine the piles of money more easily than I could envision my ongoing fruitless life. What happens next? I asked Art. The ball is in their court, he responded. He sounded compassionate, but I found I was sensing something unpleasant. While he and I had been friends since I was in my teens, I suddenly found myself with a vague feeling of distrust as I listened to him. I didn't doubt his actions to this point, but I was beginning to wonder about his intentions for the future, a future from which I would be absent. Art, what are your feelings about this? I want your real, heartfelt feelings, okay? Give it to me straight. He paused before answering, and I suddenly wondered if he was manufacturing a response simply to please me. My feelings are that I would never have the nerve to do what you're considering, David, but I think your action plan for your family is amazing. Your son's dream of being a doctor can now become a possible, maybe even a certainty. Your dream of Angelica owning her own restaurant will become reality. Jennifer can be a psychologist or a psychiatrist or doctor of any sort she chooses, whichever or whatever she wants. These things would never, ever become reality for your kids without this option. It's not an option that I would ever have the courage to choose, and I don't want to lose you as a friend, but you're a critical idealist. It's difficult for you to be happy with anything. Jobs? You've dabbled in 10 different fields to supplement your diminishing ministerial income, enjoyed none of them, and few have enjoyed your presence. Face it, life has been tough for you, and now you're faced with an option to end life on a high note and give your children the opportunity to experience opportunity that otherwise would never be possible for them. Slowly, I rose from my chair and looked at the gray clouds outside. I didn't want to talk anymore, so simply ended the phone call. Art, the master salesman that he was, had very cogently encapsulated the reality, the tragedy of my life. I was unhappy in my marriage, unsuccessful at providing for my family, and at this moment in time, I could end my unhappiness and enable my children to easily obtain all of their dreams. I only had to die to make it happen. This is the end of chapter 2. There'll be more to come in short order. You can order this if you look down at the comments under this YouTube video. There'll be a link there to lead you to a site where you can purchase the book on Kindle, hardback, or, as I like it, on a tablet. I generally read on my cell phone. I can make the print any size I want. I can lighten it up if it's in the dark, or whatever I like. At any rate, thanks for checking in, folks. Hope you've enjoyed it. Part 3 will be coming up before too long.